You're listening to the Financial Source podcast on YouTube.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Financial Source podcast. After days of really rising tension, it feels like the markets are taking a collective breath, a sigh of relief, really, as these immediate war risks tied to Iran seem to be fading.
They are, and we've seen a very aggressive unwinding of that geopolitical risk premium this morning. It's caused some sharp pullbacks in crude oil and also in safe haven assets.
Like gold and silver, which had just hit record highs.
Exactly.
But this de-escalation, it doesn't mean the volatility is over. It feels more like the focus has just shifted, almost instantly.
It's pivoted. Right back to the long-term structural drivers. We're talking about global trade and, of course, technology competition.
Specifically, we're going to be looking at Washington's new 25% tariff on certain advanced computing chips.
And that executive order, the one aimed at reshaping critical mineral supply chains, that's a huge piece of this puzzle.
We'll also examine how China is trying to navigate this, especially with reports of new rules for buying NVIDIA's H200 chips.
So today, we'll really analyze how technology, trade, and geopolitics are now, well, they're just inseparable. They're all driving global capital flows.
And we'll look at what the relative stability in the U.S. dollar signals about the bigger picture. Let's unpack it. So the first and maybe most violent move we saw was in commodities. Anything, really, that was acting as a hedge against that Middle East instability.
That's right. Crude oil, precious metals. They didn't just ease up, they fell, and they fell aggressively. Markets were basically recalibrating in real time what exactly they were paying for.
And this happened pretty fast.
Very fast. We saw this sharp reversal across the board during the London session. Brent and West Texas Intermediate crude, they dropped more than $3 from their intraday highs before, finding a floor.
Which is a textbook reaction, isn't it?
It's entirely textbook. You see a significant drop in headline risk, and that immediately translates into a removal of that insurance cost. The premium investors had baked into the price just evaporates.
So just to simplify that for everyone listening, when you say the aggressive unwinding of the geopolitical risk premium, you're really just talking about the market subtracting that fear-driven cost.
That's precisely right.
The extra price they had built into oil and gold just a day before. Is pure sentiment.
It is. And the speed of that decline tells you everything. It tells you the rally was built almost exclusively on fear, not on any fresh supply or demand fundamentals. The market had completely priced out the imminent war scenario.
And that was based on reports that Washington was looking for diplomatic off-ramps.
Yes, looking to avoid a prolonged regional conflict. So what you saw was a lot of short covering in oil and really rapid liquidation in those safe haven assets.
And precious metals saw an even bigger reaction because they're maybe the purest expression of that geopolitical hedge.
Yeah.
Gold and silver both pulled back sharply from those record highs.
They certainly did. And while, prices are still historically very high because of inflation concerns and just general macro uncertainty, the fact we saw such a dramatic drop really underscores that the gains over the last, say, 72 hours were driven almost exclusively by that one factor.
The geopolitical hedging.
Yes. Investors who were sitting on the sidelines, maybe in cash, betting on chaos, they sold, and they sold fast. It's a great sensitivity test for political signals.
But here's a question. If gold is the ultimate safe haven, why didn't it stabilize higher? I mean, the underlying trade war risk is demonstrably increasing. Aren't we just swapping one risk premium for another?
That's a critical point. And the difference really lies in the nature of the risk. Gold thrives on acute, unquantifiable risk, the risk of military action, of a sudden supply disruption, something you can't model easily.
Okay.
The market sees the U.S.-China competition as, while very significant, a structural risk. It's a quantifiable risk being managed through policy.
Through tariffs and executive orders.
Exactly. That risk is already getting factored into long-term capital flows, not just these short-term, panic-driven safe haven trades.
That makes sense. So acute military risk drives physical commodities, while long-term policy risk drives strategic investment and currency stability. Which brings us to the currency markets. While all this was happening in commodities, currencies felt, remarkably composed, especially the U.S. dollar. It traded steady, maybe slightly firmer. Why is the dollar holding so firm when we've had such a violent swing in global risk appetite?
It's fascinating, isn't it? What's happening is the dollar has transitioned from being a general hedge to being more of a policy anchor. That earlier downward pressure on the greenback, the pressure tied to those vague fears of an imminent U.S. military strike, that's just dissipated.
And that allows the market to refocus.
Right, refocus on the structural factors, the outlook for the Federal Reserve, and, more importantly, this idea of U.S. trade policy dominance.
So what you're saying is that the dollar's stability implies the market is confident. Confident that despite all these flare-ups and competition, the U.S. economy and its regulatory framework are still the fundamental anchor for global capital.
That's it. It sees the U.S. as setting the rules of the road for the future economy.
Its steadiness signals that global capital is adapting to these structural trade shifts, rather than just reacting to temporary crises.
Exactly. Money is flowing into the U.S. in anticipation of long-term strategic investment, which is often, necessitated by these new trade barriers themselves.
Okay, that's the prevailing view. But isn't the market maybe overlooking the pressure on the dollar from just the sheer scale of U.S. debt issuance? I mean, all this reshoring, the new investments in resilience, the military capabilities to back it up, that has to be funded. Doesn't that debt eventually weigh on the greenback?
It absolutely creates a long-term tension, no question. And that tension is what's keeping the dollar trading in a relatively narrow range. We do see sustained selling interest at higher levels because that structural debt load hasn't gone anywhere.
But in the short term?
In the immediate term, the dollar benefits from the simple fact that there isn't a superior alternative for deploying capital, especially when trade rules are actively being rewritten. Everyone needs dollar liquidity to operate.
We did see some interesting movement elsewhere, though. Dollar-yen is softer than it was earlier in the week. I think it's its first down day of the year.
It is.
Which feels like a curious counter-trend move.
It is. And the source of that softness seems to be domestic. It's political uncertainty in Japan itself. We're seeing a cooling of what some were calling the Takaichi trade.
The bet on Prime Minister Takaichi's agenda.
Right. The aggressive stimulus plans, the structural reforms, that drove a lot of yen selling earlier. Now there are reports that opposition parties might complicate that agenda, which is reducing some of the buying pressure on Japanese stocks and, easing pressure on the yen.
Meanwhile, sterling and the euro are just stuck.
Range bound.
They are. It reflects a broader wait-and-see tone across the rest of the major currencies. Everyone's waiting for key domestic inflation data, which really confirms that the big market narratives today are centered on either the U.S. policy outlook or these localized political shocks.
That summarizes the foreign exchange market perfectly. They're waiting for structural data to shift the narrative. But for now, the action is firmly concentrated on Washington and Beijing.
And this pivot from, let's call it a hot war to a trade war, gives us a very clear look at the structural priorities of these major global powers.
Yes, the macro narrative has instantly shifted.
From immediate military risk to long-term economic structure. The fight is now entirely focused on the economy of the future.
Which raises the critical question. How does the U.S. intend to reshape the global supply chain? And on the other side, how is China trying to adjust without derailing its own tech ambitions?
We're seeing major concrete moves from Washington.
Very concrete, all targeting high-tech inputs. This is really the most crucial area to understand for future capital flows.
Let's start with the tariffs then. The imposition of a significant 25% tariff on certain advanced computing chips. This isn't just about general semiconductors, is it? These are highly specific, high-performance computing, or HPC chips.
Precisely. This tariff is surgically targeted. It's aimed at the high-end chips used for training large language models and other advanced generative AI systems. The goal here is twofold.
Okay.
First, maintain a substantial technological lead that can't be easily closed. And second, to slow down China's military and state-sponsored tech modernization, which relies heavily on these specific chips for supercomputing power.
And 25% is a serious hurdle.
It is. It forces an immediate reconsideration of sourcing and pricing. It makes alternative, non-Chinese supply chains significantly more attractive just on cost alone.
And the action goes far beyond just silicon.
Far beyond. The president also signed a critical executive order aimed directly at reshaping global critical mineral supply chains.
Citing national security as a driving force.
Right. And this highlights the administration's realization that strategic control isn't just about the finished chips. It's about the raw materials you need to produce them in the first place.
It's almost like a 21st century version of OPEC. But instead of controlling the output of oil, the goal is to control the inputs for high tech.
That is an excellent analogy. We're talking specifically about minerals like lithium, cobalt, and various rare earth elements. The U.S. might have some domestic sources, but the global processing and refining capabilities.
That's the bottleneck.
That's the bottleneck, especially for turning raw earth into usable, say, battery-grade or magnet-grade material that is overwhelmingly dominated by China. So this executive order is all about building resilience against that single point of failure by incentivizing mining and processing in allied countries.
So the U.S. strategy is holistic. It's about controlling the raw materials, the manufacturing nodes, and the finished cutting-edge technology.
And we're seeing signals that even broader semiconductor tariffs are still on the table, possibly even minimum import prices for these critical minerals.
It's a full-spectrum approach.
And this is why we say technology, trade, and geopolitics are now inseparable. You can see this integration most clearly in Taiwan's recent confirmation that it's reached a consensus with the U.S. on preferential tariff treatment for semiconductors.
Formal agreements are expected to follow.
They are, and that effectively aligns a key global producer's supply side, the source of the world's most advanced chips, directly with U.S. policy goals. It's like securing a fortress.
But China is not just passively accepting these constraints. We've seen reports that Beijing is drafting new rules for purchases of NVIDIA's specialized H200 chips. Those are critical for their AI goals. How should we interpret that?
China is trying to walk a very, very fine line, a difficult line. They have two competing priorities.
Okay.
First is their long-term goal of fostering domestic semiconductor development, achieving self-sufficiency.
And the second.
The second is the immediate operational necessity. Their tech firms require these cutting-edge, foreign-made H200 chips right now for generative AI training.
Right. The Chinese tech giants need that horsepower to compete globally, but the government wants to cut their reliance on U.S. tech.
Exactly. So these new domestic purchase rules are an attempt to manage that tension under sustained external pressure. They might involve mandatory usage caps or stipulations that a certain percentage of training must be done on domestic chips.
Or even requirements for technology transfer back to state-backed companies.
It could be. They're trying to get the tech they need today, but in a way that forces a transition towards domestic alternatives tomorrow. It's an incredibly complicated balancing act for Beijing.
So if we connect all this back to the bigger picture, while the immediate Iran headlines have cooled, the global geopolitical risk map is still incredibly complex.
Absolutely. We may have priced out the immediate hot war risk, but the structural competition risk has only been reinforced.
And the pressure points are multiplying.
They are. I mean, look at Eastern Europe. We saw energy security issues flare up again after Russian strikes prompted Ukraine to declare a state of emergency for its power sector.
A stark reminder that energy infrastructure remains highly vulnerable.
And that geopolitical tension is not confined to just one region.
And the competition is also widening geographically. It's moving to encompass resource control in places we used to consider stable.
Like Greenland.
Exactly, Greenland. We're seeing European countries increasing their military presence there amid firm opposition to any change in sovereignty. It just highlights how security policy is bleeding directly into economic geography.
It's all about strategic resource control now, everywhere.
So against this backdrop of sustained structural tension, risk sentiment has improved a bit.
Modestly, yes. Largely due to the fading of those immediate Iran-related tail risks. That's what allowed U.S. equity futures to stabilize after that technology-led sell-off.
But the positioning is still deeply cautious.
Oh, extremely cautious. Investors are acutely aware that any of this geopolitical volatility, trade escalation, policy uncertainty can quickly reverse sentiment.
So we've stepped back from the brink on one kinetic front, only to step immediately into the minefield of global trade realignment.
Which has just as much consequence for long-term corporate valuations.
So to summarize, markets have adjusted. The immediate risk premium in commodities is lower, but capital is already refocusing on the long-term signals from trade and technology policy.
With security, energy, and technology now so deeply intertwined, the market premium hasn't disappeared. It's simply shifted its focus from the Strait of Hormuz to the supply chain of high-performance computing.
So the key takeaway for you, our listener, is that the stability of the dollar shows confidence in U.S. policy. But the scale of these new tariffs and resource orders shows the depth of the structural change that policy is trying to force. This is a multi-decade realignment.
And the real question for investors moving forward is not just who wins the tech competition, but how the collateral damage affects global capital allocation. Will these tariffs accelerate the creation of entirely new, non-aligned technology hubs outside of the US and China blocs? Or will they simply cement a new, bifurcated global order? Something to mull over as you digest the rest of this week's news. Thanks for joining us for this analysis of the shifting risk landscape, the sharp unwinding of geopolitical premiums, and the critical realignment of global trade policy.
We always appreciate you tuning in. Join us again soon on the Financial Source podcast for the next critical market update.